The competition for mayor of Boston this month got a little larger with a candidate who served until recently as the city's chief of economic development. A Dorchester native and owner of a business on Bowden Street, he also previously served as executive director of the W Street Neighborhood Initiative before making his first run for mayor 8 years ago. And joining us to talk about his new campaign is John Barros. Thank you very much for being with us, John.
Chris, thanks for having me. Always good to be on.
John, this is a different kind of a climate, to say the least, running for mayor in 2021. Looking back at what it was like 8 years ago and what you're contending with now, why give this another shot?
I've spent the last 7 years in government helping Mayor Walsh lead the city through some amazing times. First 6 years or so, we had set all types of records in growing the economy, all types of records in providing affordable housing, all types of records of moving people from jobs to good jobs. Launching things like Boston Hires and making sure people had jobs that were paying livable wages. So those were times that I really cherish. And then during the last year, we helped the city safely navigate as best we could through the pandemic, where I lost a grandmother, an aunt, and people have lost people, and it's been horrible. We've seen businesses close as I led the effort to try to save some small businesses. Um, it's that kind of work I want to get back to. I think there's a lot of things we haven't finished. There's a lot of things yet to be done, but I also want to make sure Boston comes out of the pandemic safely and that we're able to get back to that economy and then make some tremendous changes to make our economy more inclusive, more diversity, and more and spread the wealth more through all our neighborhoods.
Well, your portfolio of economic development over the past year turned into economic crisis. You had to help a lot of businesses recover from the ravages of the pandemic. Yes, the mayor gets credit for that, but what about your part in it? I mean, how did you make that work better?
Thanks, Chris. I was excited to work hand in hand with the mayor and others like Chief Martinez, head of HHS, as we launched an unprecedented campaign to help our small businesses survive. We put in close to $26 million of assistance. 16 or so million was in direct cash relief to our small businesses. We provided technical assistance. We provided different kinds of responses to things we were hearing from our small businesses as we conducted a weekly survey to understand what was going on in there in our marketplace. We also worked very closely with HHS as we communicated with small businesses. So much was happening, and businesses were being closed, and then they were allowed to open, and then there were a number of capacities, and so it was really challenging time for anybody to navigate any kind of business in our city. And we tried to make sure we were out there. So the piece that I led in supporting our small businesses and industry in general, I'm very proud of.
John, I want to ask you about another question of economic development, and which has been getting more attention recently. That is the stark racial gap in city spending on contracts. There has been more attention to that from the mayor's administration and from you. But on the other hand, some other people might say, this has been going on for such a long time. Shouldn't there have been more progress on that by now?
No, that's right, Chris. This has been going on for centuries in Boston. There is no time when minority-owned businesses or women-owned businesses have gotten their fair share of contracts in the city of Boston, which is why when Mayor Walsh and I came in, we were committed to trying to change this and increase the numbers and make it more equitable, make procurement in Boston more accessible, and make sure that people can access it. We committed to doing a disparity study from day one. We committed to learning from the disparity studies that were done in the past and why they failed to change the trend of spend. And so we worked to make sure we had the right data. We worked to clean up the data. So we did a disparity study on the data that we knew we had from 2014 to 2019. We had already issued those numbers. People knew that they were bad and they were atrocious. Recently, when the disparity study came back out, it reignited, the sense of we need to do something about it, and that's something that we share. But we had to make those numbers transparent. And we had to do a disparity study so we would have the legal mechanism to put in new mandates. So the mayor quickly signed an executive order with a new mandate for a 25%, a quarter of the money that the city spends on contracts and buying goods will go to women and minority owned businesses. That's the floor. Now, I'd love to get back in there and make sure we can hit those goals, because setting goals is the first thing, but making sure you do things like splitting up our contracts and making them smaller and more accessible, making sure you can do things like creating bonding levels that are accessible, or providing cash flow so that our small businesses can provide the bonding without crippling them, making sure that there's technical assistance to respond to what many businesses have said are very complex requests for proposal coming out of the city, because there's so many laws and regulations that guide how the city does business. Those are the kinds of things that I'd like to get in there and make sure we can do to hit those goals.
I want to ask you about other kinds of development, especially around housing and relieving the housing crunch on people of low and moderate income. How would you distinguish yourself from other candidates in handling that?
Thanks, Chris. I think, I'll start with the fact that I've been working on affordable housing for a very, very long time. Ever since I worked at the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative as executive director, we built housing. We, in fact, put together the largest urban land trust in America, building housing, parks, urban agricultural farmland, a 10,000 square feet greenhouse. And so that's work that I've been doing. The Walsh administration has done an amazing job to make sure that 20% or over 20% of the stock of housing in our city is deed restricted affordable. No other city can claim that. And then we've made sure, even when you look at last year, close to 25% of the housing that was approved by the Walsh administration had some kind of deed affordable restriction on it. And so the affordable housing needs to be a priority of the mayor, but that's my track record. My track record speaks for itself. I've been doing it for my entire professional career.
What about protections for renters? Do those need to be strengthened in some way?
Absolutely. And so when we talk about deed restricted housing, it's both rental and houses for purchasing. The deed restricted housing creates, by all respect, some kind of a rent cap. You cannot charge more than has been allotted for that unit, and so we do have rent caps on a lot of houses in the city of Boston, a lot of units. We need to do more. We need to protect people, and we need to make sure that people can access housing.
What about police reform? There seems to be a lot of agreement among most of the candidates about what's already been approved or how that might be refined somewhat. But what about making that work when you have to deal with police leadership and the leadership of police unions? Can you put that all together?
No, yes, there's a lot of agreement on the tremendous work that has already been done at the state level and at the city level. The task force that the mayor put together on police reform came out with a number of really strong recommendations, all of which were accepted by the mayor. I was proud to work with the mayor on the idea of a task force, on then looking at the recommendations and making sure that we were working with the union to try to implement it. Working with police is the name of how you get it done, right? This is about sitting down with the union and having conversations. And I can't tell you, I have not been in a conversation with police where I've heard somebody say, we're not making any changes, we're not going to make any reforms, we're going to stay the way we are. It's just not true. And so as mayor, I'd work with the unions to make sure that we're able to implement these changes and make the other changes that need to be made.
I want to ask you about the schools, and I know even at DSNI, you're also concerned about improving quality of education. But now we've had the pandemic, we're hearing about so many high school students being disconnected and other students being underserved. What about the near-term response to that that you would do as mayor?
You said it, as an executive director of the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. I worked with a coalition of organizations, with parents, and with some young people, with some students, to devise a plan on how we can support our local schools. Through that, we created two new schools, the Orchard Garden Pilot School. We also created the Dudley Street Neighborhood School. That was all part of a design of how a neighborhood can support the education of our children. And then I was appointed to the school committee. And as a school committee member, helping to govern the Boston Public Schools, I pushed for greater coordination around our schools by community organizations, by neighborhood servicing agencies, because I do believe in the community school model, which is why we applied for the Promise Neighborhoods grant to make sure that schools were connecting our students and connecting their families to the services that were available for them. As mayor, I would make sure, in fact, that the city was designed to make that readily accessible. Our parents and our students should have the best in stable housing, affordable housing. They should have the first shot at any program we're doing around workforce development and trying to place people in jobs. They should have anything we're doing around food insecurity. As you know, the digital divide and food insecurity showed up as a major problem in our school district, and so we need to, on the short term, address the digital divide immediately and make sure our students have what they need to be able to perform. I mean, even if you're coming home and trying to do a project these days, when my kids come home, they usually have to use the internet for something. And if you don't have accessibility to the kind of information that's on the internet, or if you can't do a project, or if you can't do an assignment, you're in trouble. And so this is something we need to address immediately. Food insecurity, Chris, was something that showed up as a major problem once we shut down schools. We needed to provide meals, healthy meals, to our parents and students. We need to make sure that that doesn't get covered up again. We need to address it, address our food deserts, address places in our city where there aren't any healthy choices.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us.
Chris, thanks for having me.
And good to see you again. John Barros, candidate for mayor of Boston.